Hello, dear friends. Welcome back to our channel. Today we have an extremely interesting story waiting for you to discover. Prepare a comfortable seat and a cup of hot tea. Let's start the journey right now. Years after a painful divorce, a tech tycoon's life takes a dramatic turn when an unexpected package arrives, carrying a photo album that stirs up memories. The chime of the intercom interrupted the seamless rhythm of productivity in Jacob Grant's modern, glass-paneled office. The city skyline stretched out before him, a testament to his achievements. But as he leaned back in his ergonomic chair, his eyes held no contentment. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Grant, there's a package for you," came his assistant's clear, professional voice. "Just leave it on the desk, Sophie," Jacob replied absently, his attention fixed on the quarterly reports displayed on his screen. Minutes later, the sound of the door opening barely registered. When the numbers finally blurred together, he glanced at the unmarked brown package sitting in the corner of his desk. No logo, no return address. Curiosity piqued, Jacob reached for a letter opener and carefully sliced through the tape. Nestled inside a thin layer of tissue paper was a worn leather-bound photo album. His breath caught as his fingers brushed the familiar cover. A small note fluttered to the desk. "Remember why you started." The handwriting was unmistakable. Jacob sank back into his chair, the album in his hands suddenly feeling far heavier than its weight. With trembling hands, he opened the first page. A photo of himself and Emma on their wedding day stared back at him. Her smile lit up the frame, and his younger self looked smitten and boyish in his tuxedo. The years seemed to melt away, and he felt the warmth of that bright, hopeful day. Page after page revealed snapshots of a life that now felt both near and impossibly distant. Their honeymoon in Santorini. Lazy Sunday mornings cooking breakfast in their tiny first apartment. The moment their daughter, Lily, was born, captured in a blurry photo Jacob had taken seconds after Emma cradled her for the first time. But as the pages turned, the story shifted. The later photos were fewer, the moments more posed. He could almost hear the echoes of late-night arguments and see the strain etched into their faces at dinners that ended in silence. The final photo was from a rare family vacation. Jacob, Emma, and Lily smiling for the camera. A picture-perfect image that masked the fractures beneath. The intercom buzzed again, jolting Jacob back to the present. "Mr. Grant, your 3 p.m. meeting is here," Sophie announced. "Reschedule," Jacob said curtly, his voice rougher than he intended. That evening, as the office emptied and the city lights flickered on, Sophie knocked gently on his door. She rarely intruded after hours. "Sir, about the package earlier," she began, hesitant. Jacob looked up, weariness in his eyes. "What about it?" "It was sent by Evelyn Carter," she said carefully. "She called this morning to make sure you received it personally." Jacob froze. Evelyn, Emma's mother. Of course, it would be her. She had always been the quiet observer, offering wisdom in measured doses and watching over her daughter protectively. Even after the divorce, Evelyn had remained polite, occasionally checking in about Lily. But this felt different. "That'll be all, Sophie," Jacob said softly. When she left, he turned back to the album, the note lying beside it. Was this Evelyn's way of reminding him of what he had lost, or a nudge to make amends? The next day, Jacob found himself sitting across from Emma in a neutral, polished cafe. Their bi-weekly meetings to discuss Lily had become routine, more transactional than cordial. Emma looked composed, her auburn hair tied back in a simple bun. Her hazel eyes, once warm, now carried a guarded coolness. "She's struggling with math again," Emma said, her tone brisk. "I've been helping, but it's clear she needs more support." "Then hire a tutor," Jacob replied automatically. "I've looked into it," Emma said, irritation flashing briefly. "But this isn't just about schoolwork. She's been quiet lately, withdrawn." Jacob shifted uncomfortably. She seems fine when she's with me. Emma raised an eyebrow, the unspoken truth hanging in the air. And how often is that, Jacob? When was the last time you asked her how she's really feeling? The question hit him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. As Emma continued speaking, Jacob's thoughts drifted back to the album, the note, and a life he had let slip through his fingers. Emma's voice softened as she continued. She notices everything, Jacob. She notices when you're distracted, when you're not really present. Jacob's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to deny it, but the truth of her words was undeniable. Look, Emma said, leaning forward slightly, her tone gentler. I'm not here to blame you. I just want what's best for her. We owe her that much. The conversation ended, as it always did, with polite but strained goodbyes. Jacob returned to his penthouse, the vast emptiness of the space more oppressive than ever. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the glittering city below but seeing only echoes of Emma's words. On the coffee table, the photo album lay waiting, a silent reminder of the life he had built and the one he had lost. For the first time in years, Jacob felt something stir within him, a faint, persistent pull towards something more than the hollow victories of his professional life. Evelyn's note lingered in his mind, its meaning elusive yet inescapable. Pouring himself a glass of whiskey, he sat down and began flipping through the album again. This time, he didn't stop at the happy memories or dwell on the painful ones. Instead, he tried to remember the man he had been in those photos, the one who believed in more than boardrooms and balance sheets. As the city lights blurred into the early hours of the morning, Jacob closed the album and set it aside. He didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, he felt the need to find them. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time. The next morning, Jacob woke with the photo album still on the coffee table and a faint taste of regret lingering in his mouth. The whiskey had dulled the sharp edges of his thoughts, but now, everything was back in focus, sharper, more relentless than before. Evelyn's note gnawed at him like a riddle he couldn't solve. Lily's face in the family portrait stared up at him through the album's open pages. Her smile was wide and carefree, her tiny hands clutching both his and Emma's fingers. It was a moment frozen in time, long before tension crept into every corner of his life. Closing the album with a sigh, Jacob promised himself he'd try harder, with Lily, with everything. Later that day, Jacob found himself in the bright, sterile hallway of Lily's school. As usual, he was running late for a parent-teacher conference. Emma was already seated in the classroom when he arrived, her face a polite mask of annoyance as he slipped into the chair beside her. "She's doing fine academically," the teacher said, glancing between the two of them, "but I've noticed she's been a bit withdrawn in class. She doesn't participate as much as she used to, and her energy seems lower." Jacob shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing at Emma. She said nothing but gave him a pointed look that spoke volumes. "Has anything changed at home?" the teacher asked gently. Before Jacob could respond, Emma cut in. "Lily's been dealing with a lot of transitions. We're working on making things more stable for her." Jacob felt the sting of her words but stayed silent, nodding as if they were a unified front. He promised himself he'd talk to Lily that evening, maybe take her out for ice cream or a movie, something to make her feel special. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. That evening, when Jacob arrived at Emma's house to pick up Lily for their scheduled weekend, the tension was palpable before he even stepped through the door. "I need to talk to you," Emma said quietly, ushering him into the foyer. "What is it now?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. "She's upset," Emma replied, crossing her arms. "She heard us arguing the other day. She's been acting out ever since." Jacob winced. "She heard that?" "Of course she did," Emma said, her voice edged with frustration. Jacob, she notices everything. She's been sulking in her room all afternoon, and now she doesn't even want to go with you. Before Jacob could respond, Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, her arms tightly crossed over her chest. I don't want to go, she said defiantly, her small voice cracking. Lily, come on, Jacob said, trying to sound warm but firm. We're going to have fun this weekend, just you and me. No, we're not, she shot back. You're just going to be on your phone or working, like always. The accusation hit Jacob like a gut punch. He stared up at his daughter, at the hurt on her face, and realized he had no defense. Emma watched Jacob carefully, her expression softening just enough to reveal that she noticed the cracks forming in his carefully maintained facade. Lily, let's talk about this, Jacob said, his voice quieter now. Why? Lily asked, her eyes brimming with tears. You don't care. You only care about work. She turned and ran back to her room, leaving Jacob standing in the foyer, stunned and helpless. Emma sighed. She needs you, Jacob. She really needs you, not just someone who shows up on a schedule. Her words lingered as he left, the sound of Lily's door slamming still echoing in his ears. The next evening, Jacob attended a gala for Grand Industries, one of those glittering events filled with champagne, polished speeches, and strategic networking. He hated these events, but they were necessary to maintain his empire. As he mingled with investors and clients, a woman approached him. Her sharp green eyes locked onto his with unnerving precision. Mr. Grant, she said, holding out her hand. Sophia Clark. I'm with the Chronicle. Jacob's professional smile faltered slightly as he shook her hand. Miss Clark, a pleasure. I'd say the pleasure is mine, she replied, her tone laced with just enough edge to unsettle him. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about Grand Industries, off the record, of course. I'm afraid now isn't the best time, Jacob said smoothly, already turning to disengage. I figured you might say that, she said, her voice following him like a shadow. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the reports of employee burnout at your company. Long hours, high turnover, an atmosphere of, let's say, relentless pressure. Jacob stopped, his jaw tightening. He turned back to face her, his smile now completely gone. If you have concerns about my company, Miss Clark, you're welcome to contact our PR department. PR departments tend to give me the corporate version of the truth, she said, unfazed. I'm more interested in yours. Jacob leaned in slightly, his voice low. If you think you're going to intimidate me into giving you a story, you're wasting your time. Sophia smiled, completely unbothered. I think there's more to you than the headlines, Mr. Grant. I'll see myself out. As she walked away, Jacob felt a flash of something he couldn't quite name. Anger, certainly, but also something deeper. An unsettling sense that she saw through him in a way few people did. Later that night, back in his penthouse, Jacob found himself drawn to the photo album again. This time, he flipped through it with less urgency, letting the images wash over him. His fingers lingered on a picture of Emma from their honeymoon, standing barefoot on a rocky beach, her hair wild in the wind. Another photo caught his eye, a candid shot of Lily as a toddler, sitting on his lap while he worked at his desk. She was reaching for his keyboard, her tiny hands determined to join in whatever task her father was doing. Jacob closed the album and stared out at the city lights through the massive windows. Evelyn's note resurfaced in his mind. Remember why you started. For the first time, Jacob admitted to himself that he wasn't sure why he had started anymore. His drive, his ambition, they had always been for his family, hadn't they? But somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of that. Now, all that remained were echoes of what could have been. Taking a deep breath, Jacob resolved to make things right. He didn't know how yet, but he knew he could no longer ignore the weight of his choices and their consequences. The morning after his encounter with Sophia Clark, Jacob sat at his kitchen island with a cold cup of coffee. The silence of the penthouse pressed in around him, amplifying the disquiet in his mind. He couldn't stop replaying Lily's words, or the sharpness in Sophia's tone. Both accusations felt uncomfortably similar, as if the world was finally holding up a mirror he couldn't avoid. Determined to prove otherwise, Jacob decided to make an effort. When an email from Lily's school announced a family arts night, he cleared his calendar and marked the date. Maybe showing up was the first step. On the night of the event, Jacob arrived 10 minutes early. His tailored suit felt out of place among the more casually dressed crowd of parents. The walls were covered in colorful drawings and projects. As he stepped into the hall, he searched for Lily, hoping this small gesture would be the start of something better. Scanning the room, Jacob spotted Lily near a table surrounded by her classmates. She hadn't noticed him yet, too engrossed in explaining her sculpture to a teacher. Her face was lit with rare enthusiasm, a sight that made Jacob's chest tighten with a mix of pride and guilt. "Hey, Lily," he said softly as he approached. Her smile faded the moment she saw him. "What are you doing here?" Jacob tried to hide his unease. "I came to see your art." "It's great, really." Lily shrugged, looking away. "Mom already saw it yesterday." The casual dismissal stung. "Well, I'd still like to hear about it," Jacob said, forcing a smile. "What's it about?" "It's about nature," she said reluctantly, her tone flat. "It's supposed to be a forest, but we didn't have enough green clay." "It's creative," Jacob said, trying to sound genuine. "You've got talent." Lily didn't respond. She fidgeted with the edge of her shirt. After an awkward pause, she finally looked up, her small face serious. "Why are you really here?" "What do you mean?" Jacob asked, confused. "You don't usually come to these things," she said bluntly. "Are you just here to make yourself feel better?" The words hit harder than Jacob expected. Before he could think of a response, Lily turned and walked back to her friends, leaving him standing alone in the bustling room. That night, Jacob returned to his penthouse, the emptiness of the space more suffocating than ever. He opened a bottle of wine and sank into the couch, trying to shake the lingering discomfort. Picking up his phone, he almost called Emma but stopped himself. Instead, he scrolled through his calendar, searching for another opportunity to connect with Lily. Though the thought of failing again filled him with dread, he knew he couldn't give up. The next week, Jacob's focus at work was shattered by a news alert on his phone. It was an article from the Chronicle written by Sophia Clark. The headline read, "The Cost of Ambition, the Human Toll of Grand Industries." Jacob's jaw tightened as he skimmed the piece. It was a blistering critique detailing employee burnout, high turnover, and relentless pressure at his company. Anonymous quotes from former employees painted a damning picture of a toxic work environment. Furious, Jacob called his PR team. "Get me everything you can on Sophia Clark," he demanded. "Who she's spoken to, where she's getting her information. I want it all." As the day wore on, his anger simmered into something more complicated. The article wasn't entirely wrong. Grant Industries had grown rapidly, and the demands of that growth had been steep, not just for his employees, but for himself, his family, and everyone around him. Yet, the public exposure felt like a personal attack, and Jacob wasn't about to let it go unanswered. That evening, as Jacob reviewed the article again, he received a message from Sophie, his assistant. "Thought you might want to see this," it read, followed by a link. Curious, Jacob clicked it and found himself on a website for a community center being developed on the city's east side. The architect behind the project was none other than Emma Carter. Jacob stared at her name on the screen, then at the rendering of the building, a vibrant, open space designed to serve underprivileged families. It was exactly the kind of project Emma had always dreamed of doing, back when she used to share her aspirations late at night after Lily had gone to bed. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. While he had been building his empire, Emma had been building something meaningful, something real. Unable to resist, Jacob drove to the construction site the next day. Parking across the street, he watched from a distance as workers moved about, carrying materials and shouting directions. Among them, wearing a hard hat and holding a clipboard, was Emma. She looked focused and confident, her gestures animated as she spoke to the foreman. Jacob felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, jealousy, and regret. He remembered the countless nights she had begged him to slow down, to prioritize their family and her dreams as much as his own. Now, here she was, thriving without him. Later that afternoon, Jacob sat at his desk, distracted and restless. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. "Sophia Clark is here to see you. Says it's urgent." He almost declined but then reconsidered. "Send her in," he replied. Sophia walked in with the same self-assured demeanor she'd shown at the gala. She carried a folder, which she set on his desk without preamble. "I assume you've read the article," she said. Jacob leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I have, and I'm curious. What gives you the right to misrepresent my company?" "Misrepresent?" Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Every detail in that article is backed by evidence. You can call it misrepresentation, but I call it accountability." "You don't know what it takes to run a company like mine," Jacob said, his tone sharpening. Sophia didn't flinch. "I think I know enough, Mr. Grant. The question is, do you? The pressure, the decisions, none of it's as simple as you make it sound," Jacob said sharply. "Maybe not," Sophia replied, her tone softening, "but I know the impact it has. I've spoken to the people you've left in your wake. They don't just talk about burnout. They talk about feeling like cogs in a machine you built." Her words echoed Emma's critique and even Lily's accusations. Jacob's defenses faltered, though he kept his expression neutral. "What do you want?" he asked finally. Sophia smiled faintly. "I'm not here to tear you down, Jacob. I'm here to get the truth. And maybe, just maybe, you should be asking yourself what that truth really is." She left before he could respond, leaving the folder on his desk. Jacob didn't open it right away. Instead, he stared at it, feeling more exposed than ever. That night, the photo album still sat on the coffee table in his penthouse. Jacob opened it again, lingering on the same photo of Lily as a toddler. He could almost hear her laughter from that day, her tiny voice calling him Daddy. Somewhere along the way, he had let her slip into the background of his life. Now, the distance between them felt impossibly vast. Sophia's words, Emma's success, and Lily's accusations all pointed to the same truth. Jacob Grant was a man at a crossroads. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure which way to go. The folder Sophia had left remained untouched for days. Jacob avoided it like a Pandora's box he wasn't ready to open. Yet her parting words echoed in his mind. "Maybe, just maybe, you should be asking yourself what that truth really is." One evening, while scrolling through his emails, an invitation caught his eye. It was for a philanthropy event at Emma's community center. Likely sent to a wide mailing list, it struck Jacob as an opportunity. His first instinct was to ignore it, knowing Emma would see through his intentions. But something deeper, a gnawing need to witness her work firsthand, compelled him to RSVP. The event was a week away, giving Jacob plenty of time to second-guess his decision. On the day of the event, Jacob arrived at the construction site dressed down in a simple button-up and slacks. His usual tailored suit was replaced by an attempt to blend in. The center was alive with activity. Volunteers carried materials, painted walls, and shared plans with enthusiasm. The building's open layout and bright design already radiated warmth and hope. Jacob stood on the edges of the activity, trying not to draw attention. Then he saw her. Emma was at the heart of it all, clipboard in hand, moving between groups with confidence and purpose. Her hair was pulled back, her face glowing, not with makeup, but with the fulfillment of someone living her dream. It was the same expression she used to wear when she talked about creating spaces that brought people together. For a moment, Jacob felt a pang of jealousy, followed swiftly by shame. This was what she had always wanted. He had dismissed it as idealistic and impractical. Now, seeing her passion in action, he realized how wrong he had been. Jacob watched from a distance until Emma noticed him. Her expression shifted, a flicker of surprise quickly replaced by guarded suspicion. She walked toward him, her steps deliberate. "Jacob," she said, her tone cool. "What are you doing here?" "I saw the invite," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Thought I'd come by. See what you're working on." Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. "Really? Just curiosity? Or are you looking for another tax write-off?" The jab landed harder than Jacob expected. "It's not like that," he said. "I just wanted to." "To what?" she interrupted, folding her arms. "Ease your guilt? Show up for a photo op? I know how this works, Jacob." Her frustration cut deep, but it was the hurt underneath that left him reeling. "That's not why I'm here," he said, struggling to keep his composure. "I wanted to see the work you've done. It's incredible, Emma. You've really built something amazing." Emma's expression softened slightly, but the tension in her posture didn't ease. "You don't get to do this," she said quietly. "You don't get to swoop in and act like you care now. You had years, Jacob, years to support this dream, and you couldn't be bothered. You made it clear where your priorities were." "I know," he admitted, his voice low, "and I hate that. I hate how much I let you down, how much I've let Lily down. I'm trying to fix things, but I don't know how." Emma sighed, her anger giving way to exhaustion. Fixing things isn't about showing up to one event and saying the right words. It's about showing up consistently, being present, and putting in the effort every day. Jacob nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You're right. I don't know where to start." For a moment, Emma looked at him as if she wanted to say more, but she shook her head instead. "Start with Lily. She's the one who needs you the most." The conversation ended there, leaving Jacob feeling raw and exposed. He stayed at the event for another hour, observing quietly and helping where he could. As he left, he couldn't shake the image of Emma thriving in her element, a version of her he had never fully appreciated. Back at his office the next day, Jacob finally opened the folder Sophia had left. Flipping through its contents, he found page after page of employee testimonials detailing long hours, impossible expectations, and a lack of recognition. Each story cut through his carefully constructed image of himself as a visionary leader. Sophie knocked on his door, breaking his focus. "Sophia Clark called," she said. "She wants to set up another meeting." Jacob frowned. "Did she say what it's about?" "She said she's been talking to more employees," Sophie replied, her tone cautious. "But she also said she wants to discuss what you're planning to do about it." Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Tell her I'll meet her tomorrow." The following day, Sophia arrived at his office with her usual confidence, though her expression held a trace of curiosity. She sat across from him and placed her recorder on the desk. "Mr. Grant," she began, "after speaking with your employees and reviewing the company's history, it's clear you've built something remarkable. But it's also clear that the cost has been steep for your employees, your family, and, I imagine, yourself." Jacob leaned back in his chair, her words cutting through his defenses. "Is this where you tell me I'm the villain?" he asked, his tone more resigned than defensive. Sophia tilted her head. "I don't think you're the villain, Jacob, but I do think you're at a crossroads. You can keep going the way you have, or you can start making changes that reflect the person you want to be. Her words echoed Emma's critique and Lily's accusations. Jacob stared at the recorder, weighing his response. "What do you suggest?" he asked finally. Sophia's eyes softened. "Be honest, not just with me, but with yourself. Figure out what matters most, and start there." After she left, Jacob sat alone in his office, staring out at the city skyline. The foundations of his empire felt steady beneath him, but the cracks in his personal life were impossible to ignore. He thought of Emma, of Lily, and of the man he had been when he first started this journey. For the first time in years, he wondered if he could find his way back. Jacob spent the days after his meeting with Sophia oscillating between reflection and action. He began reaching out to his employees, taking small but genuine steps to address the issues Sophia had exposed. But his mind kept drifting to Lily. Fixing his company was one thing, but repairing the rift with his daughter felt far more daunting. That Friday, Jacob arrived at Emma's house for their scheduled meeting about Lily's summer plans. He had been dreading it all day. Their recent conversations had been civil at best, tense and accusatory at worst. Tonight, he was determined to stay calm and focus on what was best for Lily. When Emma opened the door, her face was unreadable. "She's in her room," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "But we need to talk first." Jacob followed her into the living room, where a stack of brochures sat on the coffee table. Emma gestured to them. "I've been looking into summer camps for her. Something creative, maybe something that focuses on the arts. She needs an outlet." Jacob picked up one of the brochures, scanning it quickly. "These are all out of state," he said, frowning. "I thought we agreed she'd stay close to home." "We agreed she'd do what's best for her," Emma countered. "And right now, she needs more than just weekends with you in school during the week." "She doesn't need to be shipped off to some camp," Jacob said, his frustration rising. "She needs stability, not more time away from us." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Don't lecture me about stability, Jacob. You're the one who barely shows up." "That's not fair," he shot back. "I've been trying." "Trying?" Emma interrupted, her voice sharp. "Showing up to one school event or making a few empty promises isn't trying. She sees through it, Jacob. She sees how distracted you are, how work still comes first." Jacob's temper flared. "And what about you? You've been so busy with your community center that you've barely had time for her either. Don't act like you're the perfect parent here." Their voices had risen without either of them realizing. The sound of a door creaking open made them both turn. Lily stood at the edge of the hallway, her face pale and her eyes wide. "Stop it!" she shouted, her voice trembling. "You're always fighting. I hate it." "Lily," Emma began, but Lily spun on her heel and bolted out the front door before either of them could stop her. For a moment, Jacob and Emma stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. Then Jacob sprang into action, grabbing his keys from the coffee table. "I'll check the park," he said, already heading for the door. "I'll drive around the neighborhood," Emma replied, her voice tight with worry. They split up, each desperately searching for any sign of their daughter. Jacob drove to the park near Emma's house, the same one they used to take Lily to when she was little. The swings creaked in the breeze, and the playground was eerily empty. He parked and got out, his chest tightening with every passing minute. "Lily," he called, his voice echoing in the stillness. "It's Dad. Please come out." No answer. After circling the park twice, Jacob pulled out his phone and called Emma. "She's not here," he said, his voice strained. "She's not on the main roads either," Emma replied, her own fear evident. "Let's meet back at the house and figure out where else she could have gone." When they regrouped, Jacob leaned against the hood of his car, running a hand through his hair. "She can't have gone far. Maybe she went somewhere we used to take her." Emma nodded, her brow furrowed. "The lake," she said suddenly. She always loved going there. Jacob's stomach twisted. The lake was a 10-minute drive away, a place they had often visited as a family before the divorce. Without another word, they got into their cars and headed there. When Jacob arrived, he spotted Lily sitting on the edge of the dock, her legs dangling over the water. Relief flooded him, tempered by the sight of her small, hunched figure. She looked so fragile, so alone. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Lily," he said gently. She turned her head slightly but didn't look at him. "Go away." Emma arrived moments later, rushing toward her daughter, but stopping when Jacob gestured for her to wait. Jacob sat down beside Lily, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for the fighting, for everything. I know it's been hard on you and I haven't made it any easier," Jacob continued, his voice heavy with regret. Amelia didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the rippling water. "We were wrong to fight in front of you," Jacob said softly. "You didn't deserve that. None of this is your fault." Finally, Lily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want things to go back to the way they were." Jacob's throat tightened. "I know, sweetheart. I wish we could too. But even if we can't, I promise you this, we're going to do better. I'm going to do better." Emma stepped forward then, sitting down on Lily's other side. "We're both going to do better," she said gently. "You mean the world to us, Lily. We're sorry we haven't shown that enough." Lily wiped her eyes, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Jacob hesitated for a moment, then reached out and pulled her into a hug. To his relief, she didn't pull away. They sat there for a while, the three of them watching the water as the sun dipped below the horizon. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. On the drive back, Jacob and Emma spoke quietly. Their voices were no longer filled with anger, but with a shared determination to do right by their daughter. They reminisced about the times they had brought Lily to the lake, laughing at old memories and letting the tension between them dissolve, if only temporarily. By the time they reached Emma's house, Lily was fast asleep in the back seat. Jacob carried her inside and tucked her into bed, his heart heavy but hopeful. As he stepped out of her room, Emma met him in the hallway. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. Jacob nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "We'll figure this out." For her. For the first time in a long time, Emma gave him a small, genuine smile. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step closer to something better. The memory of that evening at the lake stayed with Jacob for days. Seeing Lily so fragile and lost had shaken him deeply, but the moment she had allowed herself to cry in his arms gave him a glimmer of hope. He replayed their conversation in his mind, her small voice admitting how much she wanted things to go back to the way they were. The weight of her words lingered, and for the first time in years, Jacob felt truly exposed, not as a CEO or a figure of power, but as a father who had failed. A few days later, Jacob called Emma, unsure if she would even pick up. To his surprise, she answered on the first ring. "How's Lily doing?" he asked tentatively. "She's better," Emma said. "Quieter than usual, but I think she's processing everything. She's been asking about you." Jacob's throat tightened. "I'd like to see her this weekend. Maybe take her to the park, the one we used to go to." Emma hesitated, but her voice softened. "She'd like that." When Saturday came, Jacob arrived early, armed with a picnic basket and Lily's favorite snacks. Emma had agreed to join them, and though the idea of spending the afternoon together felt strange, Jacob knew it was the right thing to do. Lily's eyes lit up when she saw him. She ran toward him but stopped abruptly, as if unsure whether she should. Jacob knelt down, opening his arms. She hesitated for only a moment before rushing into his embrace. "I miss you, kiddo," he said softly, kissing the top of her head. "I miss you too," she murmured. Emma arrived shortly after, watching the scene from a distance before walking over. The three of them set up a blanket under a tall oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. It felt almost like old times, though an unspoken tension lingered. As they ate, Lily's mood lightened. Soon, she was giggling at Jacob's clumsy attempts to juggle pieces of fruit. Emma couldn't help but laugh, though she quickly stifled it, her gaze flickering to Jacob with a mix of surprise and nostalgia. After the meal, Lily ran off to the swings, leaving Jacob and Emma alone on the blanket. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile. "She's happier today," Jacob said, watching Lily. "It's been a while since I've seen her laugh like that." Emma nodded. "She's resilient, but she's been carrying a lot. We both know that's on us." Jacob turned to her, his face etched with regret. "I know I've been the cause of most of it. I let work take over my life, and in the process, I hurt both of you." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "It wasn't just you," she said quietly. "I let it happen too. I stopped fighting for us when I should have. I gave up." Jacob shook his head. "You had every reason to. I didn't listen. You told me what you needed, what Lily needed, and I ignored it. I thought I was doing the right thing by working harder, by building this empire for us. But all I did was push you away." The raw honesty in his voice caught Emma off guard. She turned to watch Lily on the swings, her small figure silhouetted against the bright sky. "We both made mistakes," Emma said softly. "But what's important now is that we don't keep making them." Jacob nodded, his voice breaking. "I can't go back and fix everything, but I want to be better for her. For you." Emma's gaze softened, and for the first time in years, she saw the man she had fallen in love with. Not the polished CEO, but the young dreamer who had once promised her the world. She reached out, placing a hand on his. "I see that, Jacob, and I think Lily sees it too." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared past settling between them. Then Emma spoke again, her voice steady. "We'll never be what we were, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward. We can still be a team, for Lily." Jacob met her gaze, gratitude and determination in his eyes. "I'd like that." The sound of Lily's laughter drew their attention. She had moved to the monkey bars, her face glowing with joy as she swung across. Jacob felt a pang of bittersweet pride, knowing that these small moments of happiness were what truly mattered. As the afternoon stretched on, they walked together through the park, reminiscing about the times they had spent there as a family. Lily dragged them to her favorite spots, pointing out the bench where they used to sit and the tree where she had once insisted on building a secret clubhouse. The memories were a mix of joy and sorrow, a reminder of what they had lost, but also of what they still had. When it was time to leave, Lily held both their hands as they walked back to the car. For a moment, Jacob allowed himself to believe that things could be different, that they could find a way to create a new kind of family, one built on understanding and mutual respect. Later that evening, after dropping Lily off at Emma's house, Jacob lingered at the door. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me the chance to make things right." Emma nodded, her expression softer than he had seen in years. "It's not about second chances, Jacob. It's about showing up. And so far, you're doing that." As he drove home, Jacob felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. And that, he realized, was enough. That evening, as Jacob stared out at the city lights from his penthouse, Emma's words echoed in his mind. "It's not about second chances. It's about showing up." He realized that if he truly wanted to rebuild his relationships, with Lily, with Emma, and even with himself, it would take more than sporadic efforts. It would require consistency and action, not just in his personal life, but in the way he approached everything, including his company. The next morning, Jacob arrived at his office earlier than usual. He sent a message to his leadership team, calling for an all-hands meeting that afternoon. He wasn't entirely sure what he was going to say, but he knew it was time to confront the culture he had created at Grant Industries. As he worked on his presentation, Sophie interrupted him. "Sophia Clark called again," she said cautiously. "She wants to schedule another meeting." Jacob sighed, feeling a mix of annoyance and curiosity. "Set it up," he said. "Let's get it over with." When Sophia arrived later that week, her demeanor was slightly different. She still exuded confidence, but there was a hint of curiosity, perhaps even respect. "I've been hearing things," she began as she sat across from Jacob. "From your employees, from people who know you personally." "And?" Jacob asked, his tone guarded. "It seems like you're trying to turn things around," Sophia said, leaning forward. "I'll admit, I didn't expect that." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "You sound almost impressed." "Let's not get carried away," Sophia replied, though her smile softened the remark. "I'm still a journalist, Jacob, but I also believe in telling the whole story. And right now, it seems like the story is changing." She pulled out her recorder and notebook. "I want to know what's driving this shift." "Why now?" Jacob hesitated, but then he thought of Lily, of Emma, and of the person he wanted to become. "Because I finally realized that success means nothing if it comes at the expense of the people who matter most," he said honestly. "I've spent years chasing numbers, building this empire, but I lost sight of why I started in the first place. I'm trying to fix that." Sophia studied him for a moment before nodding. "Fair enough. But actions speak louder than words. So what are you actually doing to make things right?" The question lingered in Jacob's mind long after Sophia left. It wasn't enough to say he was changing. He had to show it. That afternoon, during the company-wide meeting, Jacob stood before his team, his usual air of authority tempered by vulnerability. "I've been thinking a lot about what this company stands for," he began, his voice steady but reflective. "Grant Industries was built on the idea of innovation and ambition. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of the bigger picture. We've prioritized growth over people, profit over purpose. And that has to change." He took a deep breath before continuing. "Starting today, we're committing to a new direction. We'll be launching initiatives focused on sustainability, community impact, and employee well-being. This isn't just about improving our image. It's about creating a culture we can all be proud of." The room was silent for a moment before the applause started. It wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine, and Jacob felt the weight of his words settle into something real. Over the following weeks, Jacob threw himself into the new initiatives. He worked with his leadership team to implement policies prioritizing work-life balance, invested in projects supporting underserved communities, and collaborated with environmental organizations to reduce the company's carbon footprint. Inspired by Emma's Community Center, Jacob also pledged funding for similar projects in other parts of the city. He didn't tell her about it right away, but when she eventually found out, she surprised him with a phone call. "I heard what you've been doing," she said, her tone neutral but not cold. "It's unexpected." "Good unexpected or bad unexpected?" Jacob asked cautiously. Emma chuckled softly. "Good, I think. It's nice to see you following through." Her words were like a bomb, and Jacob felt a flicker of pride. Not in the accomplishments themselves, but in the fact that Emma was starting to believe in him again. At home, his efforts with Lily were also paying off. He made a point to show up for every school event, every soccer game, and every parent-teacher conference. He stopped taking work calls during their weekends together, focusing entirely on her. At first, Lily seemed hesitant, as if waiting for him to revert to his old habits. But over time, her guard began to lower. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Lily leaned against him and said, "You're different now." "How so?" Jacob asked, though his heart swelled at her words. "You're here," she said simply. "You don't feel like a stranger anymore." It was a small comment, but it meant the world to him. Sophia's article came out a month later, titled A CEO's Redemption: The Evolution of Jacob Grant. It was a nuanced portrait that highlighted both his past mistakes and his efforts to make amends. It didn't paint him as a hero. Sophia was too honest for that. But it showed a man trying to rebuild, to learn, to grow. The article went viral, sparking discussions about corporate responsibility and the human cost of ambition. But for Jacob, the most meaningful response came from Emma. "I read the article," she said when they met to drop off Lily one evening. "It's honest, and it shows how far you've come." Jacob nodded, his heart full. "I still have a long way to go." "We all do," Emma said, "but you're on the right track." The opening day of the community center arrived on a crisp, sunny morning, and the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Bright banners hung across the entrance, and clusters of families gathered, chatting excitedly. Children ran around, their laughter echoing through the open courtyard, while volunteers guided guests through the newly completed spaces. Jacob parked a few blocks away, feeling a familiar pang of nerves. This day was significant, not just for Emma and Lily, but for himself. The community center was more than a building. It was a symbol of everything Emma had stood for and a reminder of the support he had failed to give her when she needed it most. As he approached the entrance, a volunteer greeted him with a warm smile and directed him toward the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He hesitated when he spotted Emma standing near the stage, clipboard in hand, giving final instructions to a group of speakers. She was in her element, radiant and confident, her hard work culminating in this moment. Lily stood at her side, holding a pair of oversized scissors and fidgeting with excitement. Lily spotted Jacob before Emma did and waved enthusiastically. He waved back, his heart full. Jacob felt his chest lift at Lily's joy as the ribbon-cutting ceremony began. He found a spot near the back of the crowd, watching as Emma stepped onto the stage, her voice steady and filled with emotion. She spoke passionately about the center's mission: to serve the community, provide a safe haven for families, and create opportunities for children to thrive. The audience broke into applause, and Jacob couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Lily joined Emma for the ribbon cutting, her small hands gripping the oversized scissors. The crowd cheered as they snipped the bright red ribbon, and the center's doors swung open. People began pouring inside, eager to explore the new space. Jacob hung back, content to observe. He watched as Emma led groups through the building, her passion evident in every gesture and explanation. Lily darted between rooms, her excitement contagious as she showed off the spaces she had watched take shape during construction. At one point, Jacob caught sight of Emma and Lily laughing together in the art room, Lily holding up a lopsided clay sculpture while Emma grinned. The sight filled Jacob with a bittersweet ache. It was a beautiful moment, a testament to their bond, but it also underscored everything he had lost. Still, he couldn't help but feel grateful. They were happy, and that was what mattered most. As the event wound down, Jacob stepped inside the building for the first time. The design was stunning, open, warm, and inviting. He wandered through the halls, pausing to admire thoughtful details. Vibrant murals painted by local artists, cozy reading nooks, and a bustling activity room where children laughed and played. Near the front, he ran into Emma, who was directing volunteers as they cleaned up. She looked up, surprised to see him, but her expression softened. "Hey," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't think you'd come inside." "I couldn't miss seeing what you've built," Jacob replied, his voice sincere. "It's incredible, Emma. Truly." She smiled, and for a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything you've done to support this." I know you didn't have to. Jacob shook his head. It wasn't just for the center. It was for you and for Lily. You both deserve better from me. I'm just glad I could help, even in a small way. Her gaze lingered on him, and for the first time in years, there was no tension, no blame, just understanding. You've come a long way, Jacob, Emma said quietly. I think she sees it. I see it too. He nodded, his throat tightening. It means a lot to hear that. They didn't say goodbye, but when Lily ran up and threw her arms around him, it felt like the closing of one chapter and the tentative beginning of another. A week later, Sophia's follow-up article was published, From Ambition to Accountability, Jacob Grant's Journey. The piece delved into his transformation as a leader and as a person. It wasn't glowing. Sophia's honesty wouldn't allow for that. But it was fair, highlighting his mistakes while recognizing his efforts to change. The article went viral, sparking debates about corporate responsibility and redemption. Messages poured in from colleagues, acquaintances, and strangers who resonated with his story. But what mattered most were the reactions from Emma and Lily. You're famous again, Lily teased one evening, holding up her tablet with Sophia's article on the screen, but in a good way this time. Jacob laughed, ruffling her hair. I'll take it. As the weeks turned into months, a new dynamic began to solidify. Jacob and Emma found a rhythm in co-parenting, balancing responsibilities and supporting each other in ways they hadn't before. Lily blossomed under their renewed attention, her confidence growing with each passing day. One evening, Jacob sat alone in his office, the city lights twinkling outside his window. The photo album Evelyn had sent him months ago sat on the desk, its leather cover worn but familiar. He opened it one last time, flipping through the pages slowly and letting the memories wash over him. The images no longer felt like painful reminders of what he had lost. Instead, they felt like a foundation, a starting point for the person he had become. He lingered on a photo of their family at the beach, Lily's tiny hand clutching his and Emma's, their smiles bright and unguarded. With a deep breath, Jacob closed the album and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't about forgetting or erasing the past. It was about honoring it while moving forward. As he leaned back in his chair, Jacob felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He wasn't the man he used to be, and he wasn't yet the man he wanted to become. But he was trying, and for the first time, that felt like enough. The story of Jacob Grant reminds us that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning from it, growing, and striving to be better for the people who matter most. His journey shows that even in the face of regret and broken relationships, it's never too late to change course and rebuild. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt tales of transformation and redemption. If this story resonated with you, let us know in the comments. What would your next step be if you were in Jacob's shoes? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next stories.